What is a clinical bike fit? And is there any difference between this and a regular bike fit? To answer this question, I've sought out the help of bike fitter and physio and owner of UK Bike Fit, Dan Smith. We get into a really interesting discussion about the science of pain, the underlying truth about micro adjusters and macro absorbers, whether it's normal or not that things will feel strange after a bike fit. And at the end of it all, Dan shares some key tips to help you self-assess your own bike position. So if you've been wondering what a clinical bike fitter is, time to find out.
Welcome to Cycling Demystified, brought to you by Foundation Bike Fit and Frequency Cycle Works, the podcast where we help you take your cycling to the next level by sharing the knowledge from experienced bike fitters, mechanics, and the hidden players within the bike industry.
All right, welcome to the podcast, Dan Smith from UK Bike Fit. It's always really nice to have other bike fitters on the podcast sharing their knowledge, but I was particularly excited to get you on board because you are a physio as well as a bike fitter. So a clinical bike fitter, is that the term you guys tend to use?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we'll talk about how it differs from other bike fitters, I guess, but yeah, that's the term we go with.
And yeah, I think we're going to structure this show, this episode, around the idea of a clinical bike fit. What does it mean? Does it mean anything? Does it mean something different to a normal bike fit? And maybe where that kind of journey may take you down a bike fit route. Maybe where would you or when would you seek out a clinical bike fitter rather than just a normal bike fitter? So yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting discussion. But before we do that, can you let everyone know where you are, who you are, and where you're based and what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Thanks for having me on. First of all, really like the way that you've developed this podcast and progressed it and put out some really good knowledge out there into the public domain, because there is a lot of other information out there on bike fitting and on social media and Google and websites and YouTube and all the rest of it that muddies the waters, let's say. So to have a really nice, clear and precise podcast full of good, solid information is great. So yeah, happy to be on.
All right, you can come again, Dan.
Yeah. So enough brown nosing. Let's
tell us who you are.
Yeah. So I'm Dan Smith. I own and run UK Bike Fit. We're a bike fitting studio and performance testing centre based in Matlock, Derbyshire, near the Peak District. I'm a physio and bike fitter, and our thing is around having physio and bike fitting in one place. So we have another bike fitter called Jen, who is a physio and ex-elite triathlete. So the two of us together perform the majority of our services. We also have performance coaching. So we have a coach, Ewan, who does some work for us as well. So we're very much in the bike fitting and performance spectrum of bike fitting. But as you said, we're going to talk about the physio side of things today and see how that makes things different, or how that changes things, or how it doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, testament to the quality of your studio. You've had some pros coming through this year, getting fitted, fitting them out with shoes, leg shoes, which we both sell, which is great.
Yeah. We've had a couple of pros actually come through via Lake. So Ben Swift of Ineos and James Shaw at BF. And then James has also done some performance testing with us as well, which is always fun to watch and scary to see the numbers as they just keep going up and up and up and not stopping. So yeah, that's always good fun.
Yeah, they're definitely another species, aren't they, the pros? So.
Total freaks.
Yeah. Did you get to watch much of the Olympics this year?
I did actually, yeah. I did manage to get to see at least highlights of stuff. So it's always good to watch, especially obviously the cycling orientated events and triathlons. Yeah.
Stuff. Yeah, I was going to go down another rabbit hole of looking at pro positions, but we'll save that one for another episode. So.
Yeah, we've had that sort of thought as well. It's always fun to watch their sort of positions and how they, whether they're good or not.
Yeah,
and whether just because they're
certainly how they evolve over time. I think certainly Pog's position's been evolving quite rapidly. Over the last 5 years, there's been a lot of chat about it. So, but we'll save that one for another episode. Just teasing that one out there. But yeah, let's get back into the realm of physio. So, did you start out as a physio first and then come to bike fitting, or the other way around. Always interesting to see
Yeah,
where people enter the world of bike fitting, because
yeah,
it's pretty
definitely.
niche already. So
It is niche. It is niche. I seem to think that there's two main ways in, and that's either through the clinical medical side or through the cycling side, and that's you can
yeah,
sort of separate people into those two categories, I guess. But yeah, so I was a physio, still am a physio, but was a normal physio if you like. So did my degree as a physiotherapy, which is it's called physiotherapy degree, and then you exit that degree, and most physios usually go out straight into the NHS, which I did. And in the NHS, you start out as a junior and do some rotations in various areas of physiotherapy, of which there are many, many more than I even knew when I was first training as a physio. I think you start
yeah,
as a physio entering that world thinking, oh, I want to do, especially you know from the hobbies that I had at the time. But you enter that world thinking, I want to be a sports physio, and I want to be the guy that runs on the pitch and
yeah,
sprays the magic spray and then runs off again and earns loads of money for doing it. And then you suddenly soon realize that there's a lot more of a spectrum to physio. So you go into the NHS and you do rotations. So you work in multiple areas of physio on wards, in hospitals, inpatients, outpatients, in the community. And I then specialized in MSK, musculoskeletal physio, which is what most people think of as physio when they think of a physio, dealing with the body and pain and injury and post-surgery and all that sort of stuff. So specialized there in the NHS and worked in the NHS for in total maybe 2.5, 3 years for mixing my NHS work with some private work. So I worked for a couple of private practices on the side, and at the time this was evenings and weekends and just doing it in my spare time, and which eventually that grew and it developed so that I could actually do that full time and leave the NHS, as I'm not getting to not getting
yeah,
to the potential downsides of working in the NHS, but it was definitely a more attractive um, proposition to work in the private world than the NHS at that time. So, and the private practice that I chose to work for was very heavy into biomechanics. So they did a lot of work with some local amateur or semi-professional sports and teams, doing lots of pre and post season assessments. So working out where people are strong, where people are weak, where they're likely to get injured, and obviously hoping to prevent them from getting injured by providing them some sort of treatment plan and treatment program for the season and in the off season. So I did a lot of that whilst working for that private practice, as well as seeing, general problems like knee pain, back pain, mobility problems, all that sort of thing. So post-surgical stuff. So I think that's where my biomechanics background really, and that's what I really enjoyed doing in terms of physio at the time. That was my thing. I really liked working in the gym with people and doing those assessments and creating treatment plans and programs for people to prevent them from getting injured.
Was that with lots of different types of athletes from different sports, or
Yes, yeah. So it wasn't sports specific at all. It was rugby, taekwondo, swimming, runners, football, weightlifters. Yeah, just
yeah,
to think of a few off the top of my head. Yeah, we did a lot of that sort of stuff with multiple different athletes, which is, from a learning perspective, it was great to see like multiple different body types and athletes and how they do what they need to do for that specific sport. But then started doing that with a local triathlon club, a big local triathlon club who had a lot of athletes who were pretty serious, like age groupers, pretty good level athletes at age group level. And again, doing the same sort of work with them. So again, looking at their biomechanics and their sort of strengths and weaknesses, which really led me on to looking at cycling biomechanics and cycling analysis a bit more deeply. And this is where bike fitting came in. So this is where I really started to look into bike fit a bit more. At the time as well, I am a cyclist, so I'm cycling a lot. At the time, I was training for doing Land's End John O'Groats, so I was heavily involved in cycling as a hobby cyclist as well. So when these two worlds of cycling and physio and then cycling analysis with triathletes came together, I was like, wow, okay, well, this is like the perfect mix of
yeah.
work and hobby, and this is what I want to do. So yeah, started looking into bike fit a bit more and doing my own sort of research, and then I sought out some bike fit specific training, and that was with Andy Brook, who was the ex IBFI president. It was the IBFI president at the time. So I actually went to Andy's studio and did basically just did some shadowing there, and then we did some joint work, and he did some teaching, training, and that's really what hooked me to the point where I knew I didn't really truly enjoy doing the physio side of things anymore because,
Right.
as in like the physio treatment side of things anymore, because I just liked doing bike fitting so much. So I was like, I want to do more bike fitting and less physio. And yeah, at the time, Andy was leaving to go to America to pursue another job. So after we spent some time with him and did lots of training, and he's spoken about things a lot. He sort of said, well, I'm sort of looking for someone to take this fit studio space, which at the time was above a bike shop in Long Eaton called Leisure Lakes. They have a few shops across the country, so they had space for a bike fitter. And yeah, Andy was like, I'm looking for someone to take this space. Would you be interested in doing it? And basically snapped his hand off. So um, that's where it all started.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. I love hearing the stories of how people get into it because, yeah, bike fitting itself is already a niche within a niche, and so the common theme seems to be, yeah, everyone gets into it because it's their kind of like passion for the sport and learning about biomechanics, essentially trying to solve their own problems as well, and seeing how they can help people out. So yeah, really interesting to see how you got into that. I was kind of similar in that I studied with Tony Cork for a while, and then he had a studio in London, and then kind of moved out and was like, hey, do you want to take over that studio too? So some interesting parallels of
Yeah.
how you kind of evolve as a bike fitter, kind of going from apprentice to kind of practitioner. So yeah, that's really cool. And do people now, obviously you set yourself up as a kind of clinical bike fitter, and is that the main reason why people tend to seek you out because you have that physio side of things? It might be quite a hard question to kind of answer.
No, yeah. I mean, we do. I mean, when we do our assessments, one of our questions is, well, how did you find us? Like, why have you come to us? Because it's really interesting for us to know from a business point of view why people are actually booking an appointment. So, yeah, I think from a clinical bike fitting perspective, the way I see clinical bike fitting is basically just a medically trained professional within bike fitting or offering a bike fit. That's sort of how I would define it. So yes, we do get a lot of people, and we probably see more people with medical related issues than the average bike fitter, let's say. So we get people seek us out post surgery or before they have surgery because they're unsure about how to rehab and how to get back on the bike in the best possible way. Or even whilst we're talking, I'm thinking about a guy we saw last week who came to us because he had type 2 diabetes, and one of the symptoms of type 2 diabetes is peripheral neuropathy, where you lose sensation and blood flow and sensory feedback to the peripheral limbs. So he had sensory deficit in his feet, and he came to us because we were physios, and he knew we'd know a bit more about that than most people. So yeah, people do seek us out for those specific reasons.
Yeah, that's really cool. And as a kind of physio practitioner, what I'm really interested in is in how that kind of meshes with the bike fitting process. Because if you go in for like a physio appointment, usually it's like 45 minutes, like max, or maybe an hour. And that can be like a really big chunk of like a bike fit too. So do you tend to try and mesh a physio kind of perspective into every bike fit session, or is that kind of, do you try and keep them separate? Or, how do you meld the two worlds together?
Yeah. It's definitely don't keep it separate. I mean, the way and this goes back to when I was doing training with Andy. When I was first spoke to him, I was like, well, how do you become a bike fitter? Like, what course do you have to do? What qualification do you need? And he was like, well, kind of don't need one. I was like, what? Like, really?
Yeah.
So the way I see bike fitting is very much that it's healthcare. We're working with people who are in pain or who have injuries, who are post-surgery, or they have some sort of health-related issue that is related to their bike. And from that sense, it's no different to physiotherapy. We do, within our bike fit session, we structure it in that we have our subjective assessment, we have our objective assessment, which is all very, the process we've developed is all very taken from a normal MSK physio assessment. We obviously just direct the questions a little bit differently and make them specific to cycling or the bike. So there's no difference in my mind to when I'm doing bike fit to when I used to do a physio treatment session, in that I'm still doing the same sort of assessment. I still want to find out the same sort of information. When we do our objective assessment, I'm still looking for the same sort of things that I would do in terms of a general assessment from a physio point of view. I'm still doing those biomechanics tests that I used to do when I was working with other athletes, non-cyclists. And yes, and directing whatever the treatment plan would be, directing that around our assessment findings. And that is basically the structure of a physio session. So it's definitely, I do feel like that physios are well placed in the bike fitting world because there is so much crossover. And I certainly can't imagine doing, or at least working in the same way that I do now, but I can't imagine doing a bike fit without having had that 3 years of training in the physiotherapy degree, and then the work and the support I had when I was first working in the NHS, and having that general knowledge and understanding of different medical conditions. I would definitely find it difficult to do a bike fit, or it's especially to find it difficult to work in the same way that we do now. So we do collide those two worlds a little bit, really, in the sense of doing our bike fit sessions.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's where the real advantage of having that kind of medical knowledge and real knowledge and the experience of working with bodies. Certainly, so I came from the opposite way of being involved in the bike fit world, mechanics, shop floor, getting people sized up on bikes and so on, and then discovering my way into kind of bike fitting, getting people to move and try to understand the body. And essentially, I feel like bike fitting does itself a little bit of disservice by calling it bike fitting, because the emphasis is very much on the word bike, whereas actually it's probably, the more I've been in the world of bike fitting, it's much more about the body and the human that's on it. You know, if the human is not functioning well, then you're very limited in what you can achieve on the bike. So you know, where do you start to kind of focus your attention on, either human or bike, machine? And it's always an interesting choice. And certainly for myself, kind of working out where someone will want to go. You know, are they more interested in kind of body or bike, or where they're going to put the effort in is always a tricky part and an essential part of every bike fit. So yeah, I was kind of wondering, you know, do you tailor each fit to that individual? Do you see the similar kind of trends of, well, I could give them some kind of work to do off the bike, but I just know that they're not going to do it, so you know, we'll concentrate on something else?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because, like you say, the emphasis always has to be on the body. Even if you're doing something to the bike to change something, the thing that you're trying to change is how that body moves or how that body functions. So even if you're very bike focused from a fit point of view, maybe inadvertently you are still very body focused, because you are doing something to that bike to make a change to the body. So knowing, or deciding is probably a better word, deciding when to use the modalities you have in front of you, or the tools you have in your toolbox, whether that is a body perspective and you actually really need to get this person in the gym and lifting some heavy weights, or whether you should focus on the bike. I don't think it's ever one or the other. It's always both. You can't change one without the other. Even if, let's say you'd never ever do this, but let's say you did see someone and didn't touch the bike at all and didn't move anything and just had them in the gym for 3 months. Well, in 3 months' time, you're probably going to need to move the bike, because that body has then changed. So the answer is always both, but absolutely, it's knowing when to use which treatment method. So, and I always talk about it in treatment, and which again just comes from
Yeah.
physio land, I suppose. But
Yeah.
understanding and I think this is where physios are well set up just through going through the training that they go through, and it's probably a perspective that a lot of you wouldn't get the same perspective out of not being medically trained, but it's this understanding of how each person functions, what is it in their lives that actually is the driving factor, because we see a lot of people who could do and could use spending a lot more time working on their body in terms of either flexibility or strength or some sort of body improvements like that. But actually, when you're doing this assessment and you're actually finding out about their life and you're asking like, well, how much training do you do? And they're like, well, I can only do 6 hours. Like that is it. I've got 2 kids. They're both feral. They take up all my time, and I've got this really high stress job that I'm driving 10 hours a week for in commutes and all this lot, and I can only fit in 6 hours, and that's it. Well, if I'm then saying to them, okay, well, what you really need to do now to make yourself better is spend 3 hours a week in the gym. There's no, like, they're not going to do it. There's no point in me saying that to them or advising that, because I know that they can't do it. We touch on it and be like, well, look, if you had the time, then this would help, and this is the reason. But actually, maybe let's go down this route, because it's going to be less time intensive for you, and it may take a bit longer for your body to adapt to these sort of bike changes that we might make. But actually, for you, this is the best way, even if it's going to be slow and it's not the ideal way. I know you've not got time in your life to be doing this. So knowing the person in terms of what they're going through in their day to day is really important, and
Yeah.
not just saying to them, oh yeah, you've got to do all of these exercises, because they'll just leave. Even if they say yes and nod politely in the session, as soon as they leave that room, they're going, well, I'm not doing them.
Yeah.
I haven't got time. So they aren't going to get better.
Yeah. I think this is where the kind of individuality of bike fitting, or really, yeah, as you said, just really understanding that person, and certainly from an industry point of view, like the attractive thing about bike fitting for a lot of companies is having a formulaic or algorithmic kind of process to it, which they can just kind of shoehorn everybody into it. But if you start looking at the body, as you guys do, as we do, then it suddenly becomes a lot more complicated, because there's a whole set of parameters which involve, person's livelihood, how they're feeling, what their psychology is, where they're at in their life, where they're coming to this fit from. All those factors are just as important. And
Yeah,
that informs so much of the other choices that we make through a fit. So I guess you've already had that kind of training kind of ingrained into you as a practitioner who's working, if you're a physio, working with like multiple different, or just the public, all the great and good and bad at the same time. So
I'm the ugly.
Yeah.
But yeah, like 100%, you've just hit the nail on the head with like the downside of these fit systems is that it is all very formulaic, and it is all very numbers heavy, and we aren't numbers as humans. We are very complex individuals, and as you said, with the psychological stuff as well. Again, I think this is where, at the risk of going off on a very obtuse tangent, this is where, again, the physio sort of training comes in, I suppose, because we do learn about this sort of stuff. It doesn't mean you can't learn about it if you're not a physio or not a medically trained practitioner, but the science of pain is really like drilled into you. We spend a lot of time looking at how pain is produced and what drives pain and what drives pain in different people, and knowing that pain isn't just physiological, it's psychological. You have all these different drivers of pain that are ultimately driven by someone's lifestyle and where they're at in their lives. And actually, I think in bike fitting, we're always mainly dealing with people who have some sort of pain, 99% of the time. So actually understanding, right, well, this pain, especially with chronic pain, which can be described as pain that you've had for over 3 months, but pain where that person's become sort of centrally sensitized to that pain. They've had it for so long that the brain reacts differently to certain stimulus, sensory stimulus. And if you've got an influencer of that pain, such as anxiety, stress, sleep, that isn't addressed, then, or at least isn't brought up, then you're only going to go so far with making saddle height adjustment, let's say.
Yeah.
Because if this person isn't sleeping, or their diet isn't great, or they've got, redundancy stuff going on at work, some sort of stress driver, all of these influences have a massive, massive impact on pain. And it's still a big area of research that isn't fully understood in the medical world, is in terms of how pain is driven. But I mean, in the physio world, we call all these sort of factors yellow flags, which are barriers to treatment, barriers to reasons why people wouldn't get better, even if the treatment is correct. So understanding all of that and sort of addressing it within a bike fit is obviously very hard and very difficult, and you can't do all of that in one session. But it's important to recognize like that there's all of these different factors that influence someone's saddle discomfort, or their back pain, or their neck pain, or whatever.
Yeah, that's
it's interesting.
Yeah, I've got two questions off the back of that. So one was, the word pain already seems fairly triggering in the kind of bike world sense, because I think cycling has a really interesting relationship with pain and what people are able to put themselves through, or certainly endurance sport in general is all about enduring the pain, as it were.
Yeah. So
I guess I'd be really interested to hear your perspective on how that kind of influences the kind of riders that you see, and how the decisions that you take within your bike fit. And the second question was just about, I guess as a practitioner as well, then you tend to offer follow-up fits as well, so that we can get so much done in one session, but we know we want to see people again to see how they're progressing and what's happening later. Yeah, so can you explore some of those that kind of pain topic, and then kind of how you kind of go about trying to get people to come back in and just kind of make sure that they're on the right track and so on.
Yeah, sure. So the pain topic is a 3 day long topic. Ultimately, I think going back to what I was saying about people who've suffered pain, like I said, the definition for chronic pain is pain that's gone on for longer than 3 months or 12 weeks. So those are the sorts of time frames we know that central changes start happening within the nervous system and within the brain in terms of how people detect pain and how they deal with it. So I think we've all had those people or those clients who we term, and that the terms have been coined as micro adjusters or macro adapters. Those people that are really sensitive to change in one way or another, whether it is actually pain or whether it is just some other sensation that they're feeling, they will feel a 2 millimeter adjustment in saddle height, whereas other people won't feel a 2 centimeter adjustment in saddle height. And ultimately, I think it comes down to how sensitized the nervous system is to that stimulus. So when you're dealing with those people who you find that they are very, very sensitive to change, then really what I'm thinking is, well, your central nervous system is just really overstimulated for some reason, whether that's been going on for a number of months or years, or whether this is something more recent. You would then treat them differently based on that knowledge, and knowing that you can't just then go and make huge changes in one go, and the communication around what you should feel and what you probably will feel, and actually this feeling isn't a bad feeling, just run with it and it'll be okay, as well as trying to tap into maybe reasons why they are centrally stimulated and why they are oversensitized to these adjustments. And there's ways to do that sensitively, and trying to dig into their lives a little bit in terms of their, like we said before, their sleep, anxiety, stress, all that sort of stuff, diet. So
that's really interesting kind of hearing you say that. I heard someone else talking about it from a more medical or clinical perspective, but just the idea that if you are like super sensitive to changes, then this is definitely a bit of a red flag for me, in terms of like, well, why are you so sensitive to it? What's your body really reacting against? And they're the people that almost always searching for that kind of micro adjustment in saddle height, and they keep coming back in. It's like, I just need another, like, I just need another 2 mil or 3 mil here, or today I feel like this, and they're overthinking it a lot. And sometimes it's really difficult to tell people just to, just run with it for a bit, just let your body absorb and adapt and get used to it and feel safe with that kind of position. It's going to be okay. You don't have to overthink it too much. So those are always like kind of tricky fits. And
Definitely.
I guess.
And yeah, sorry.
I was just going to say, like, when you put that kind of label on of like, oh, you're like a micro adjuster or macro absorber, then people get stuck in that, and they just want to keep on that. They don't want to lose their sensitivity, maybe.
Yeah. Or just, again, these labels are fine. I mean, whatever you want to call it, that's okay. But as long as you understand that the reasons why this person might be a micro adjuster is the ultimate thing, rather than just saying, oh, that's just how you are. Like, you are just sensitive to change. Well, there will be a reason why someone responds to the same stimulus differently, whether that stimulus is a change in saddle height or whatever. People respond differently, and digging a little bit deeper into, well, why is that happening? I think without doing that, it's very hard to then get to the bottom of, or very hard to get to a result where the person is better off, because you'll always be, you could be adjusting saddle height constantly, adjusting cleat position constantly, whereas actually they're getting 3 hours sleep a night because they've got a newborn.
Yeah.
And, their job's very stressful or whatever. So you're never going to change that. So, as I say, addressing those sorts of problems as well as going through what you'd want to do in a bike fit is tricky, but necessary in some cases.
Are there any times where you've had to kind of almost curtail bike fit? Be like, hey, look, we're just not going to get that far down the road because of X, Y, Z. You're not sleeping that much. You're super stressed out, so on. And maybe let's knock it on the head today and come back in later on when you
sure.
More chilled out.
Sure, but I think, like, rather than, and this comes down to how that person views a bike fit when they first come for the appointment. Like, are they expecting to walk out after 3 hours and be fixed, or are they're buying into the fact that the bike fit is a process, and I will probably need to come back, and it's going to take a few months for these long-term changes to take effect. But we've definitely had conversations with the bike fit where it's been like, well, we've done so much today. Let's go away for a couple of months. I'll book you back in for a follow-up. Let's do these things within that couple of months, and we'll see how we are then. And treating it as very much a long-term process. And we try and do this as a business by how we communicate what a bike fit is even before they've booked an appointment, so that when they're booking, they know they should know like what they're sort of buying, if that makes sense. And especially around some of the communication that we send out, before they come for their appointment, with confirmation emails and whatnot, we've got language in there that makes it very clear that, look, the bike fit is a process. You're not going to, it's very unlikely that you'll be cured after one session. We'd like to see you again, and then that conversation obviously continues during the fit as well. So I think making sure that people who you're working with actually understand what the goal is, rather than trying to fix you after 3 hours when you've had this back pain for 10 years. Like, it's very unlikely that's going to happen. If we work together long term, then we can probably get there.
Yeah, I think, and I feel like that's super important. We spoke to Lee Prescott recently, from president of IBFI at the moment, and one of his goals is trying to educate or put the word out there as much as possible about bike fitting being that kind of process. We're working with the body. Things take time to change sometimes, especially if you put in a lot of change. And so there should be an expectation that bike fit is treated as a process. It's okay to have repeated visits, and that should be the norm, rather than just get in there and miraculously you have your bike fit and you're fixed and that's it for life. Just bodies just don't work that way.
Sometimes they do, and it's great when that happens because you just feel like a wizard.
Yeah.
But it's very, very, very rare. And Lee's got the right idea with like spreading that information. I mean, as bike fitters, we know that that's the case, and you do still see a lot of, and there is a lot of stuff out there online about this saddle will cure you from this pain. This saddle height is the perfect saddle height, and you will definitely not get any. It's not as black and white as that. There is so much grey area, just as there is in normal physiotherapy. There is no one way to treat anybody, but multiple ways might get the same outcome. But there is no, oh, if your knee hurts here, you need to move your cleat this way. Like it's not quite as simple as that.
Yeah, I know. That's the dream, isn't it? Or the hack that everyone's looking for is that kind of magic bullet that just goes, this person did it, so it's worked for me.
Yeah.
And certainly I guess that's the dream of technology, and the bike is a piece of technology. Recently, it's been all about 3D saddles for us. So, people will come in and see all these 3D printed saddles and it looks amazing. Must be the best saddle ever. And we test it out and they're like, actually, it's not very good at all. And they'll go back to whatever they had before. So, but for some people it works a treat. So, yeah, we just got to always coming back to that kind of individuality. Actually, that reminds me of us speaking to another fitter, John Higgins, over in the States. And the podcast we recorded was all about an article he wrote about body measurements and movement patterns, body patterns, he calls it. So he uses body measurements as the start of his bike fit process, just to get an idea of what structures are we dealing with. Are they, is this rider relatively long-legged and short torsoed, or do they have long arms relative to legs and so on? And that gives some parameters to kind of where the bike fit might go, because you're bounded by structures. But then you still got to look into, what their movement patterns, where the restrictions are, where they can move into, what they want to do on their bike, and so on. But when we're riding a bike, we're always looking for, or trying to fit people into a particular mold of what a cyclist should look like. Essentially that's what we're doing when we look at people out riding. We're like, this is kind of what we want them to look like as a cyclist. And so when everyone looks at the pros on TV, they're like, that's what a good cyclist should look like. This is what I want to look like. But actually, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that needs to go into the equation, rather than, just trying to fit everyone into that box of what a cyclist should look like, because that's what the majority is. This is what a cyclist is, and then trying to find that individuality within them. So it's an interesting kind of conundrum of, well, there is some consensus on what a cyclist should look, but we still need to individualize everything and get that person kind of working well on a bike.
And like going on from that, we do get a lot of people who say like, well, I just don't look good on the bike. And normally it's discourage people from looking at the pros and looking at what they're doing, because like we've said earlier, they are freaks. So why are we comparing ourselves to these freaks of nature that can do all sorts of crazy things on a bike? But actually looking at the pros, or the pro peloton, is quite a good thing to do, because even though all of these guys who are of similar age, within 15-20 years of each other, they are similar, they have similar genetics, they are all very strong, they all train a very similar amount, they all have the same sort of lifestyle in terms of work and time, but there is so much variation in position even amongst those people who are very physiologically and demographically similar. So why should we then compare 50-year-old Bob to these pros? They even the pros look different, and there is this thing around image with cycling, and there always has been, always will be. It's very fashionable, historically fashionable sport. So there's a lot of fashion that comes into cycling, but image is very important. And if people don't look a certain way, then they do seem to think that there's something wrong with them, when actually You just look how you look, and that's okay.
Yeah.
We shouldn't all look the same.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And again, that's another quirk of cycling being a very aesthetic sport. Of, you know, I don't know how the rules got established, but yeah, there's certain. Certainly, you know, if you want to fit into the tribe of cycling or road cycling in particular, then there is a certain set of rules that we need to abide to make ourselves feel like we're part of the group.
Yeah, exactly that, exactly. But it doesn't always necessarily mean that you're in the best position if you look like Tadej Pogacar.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I'm going to go back to something you said earlier, which was, you know, when you were working with other athletes back in your NHS days or just after NHS days, and working with a whole range of different athletes and getting them in to have a look at their movement and almost being able to predict what injuries might occur, how you can prevent certain injuries happening, and so on. Do you get similar kind of, or go through a similar kind of process for bike fitting? Like as you're assessing someone, then you can almost see, you know, hey, this is what's happening with your body, and if you keep doing this, then this is going to happen.
Yeah, sure. So ultimately it's looking for areas of weakness, and not weakness just in terms of how strong you are, but weakness in terms of biomechanical weakness. So do you move in a certain way off the bike? That means you're probably going to move this way on the bike, which is going to develop into something more further down the line, because cycling is such a biomechanically repetitive sport in that you're just working in the same way, in the same position, and you're pushing those pedals thousands of times a minute, every minute for hours and hours and hours, for weeks and weeks, months and months, years and years. So these movement patterns, sometimes they develop into nothing, and that's fine because we're all individual and we all have our own individual movement patterns. But sometimes, if you have this certain weak trait in terms of your biomechanics, then you're actually going to be overloading structures that are likely to turn into injury. Not definitely, but there's the likelihood there that you might hurt yourself by doing this. So, in that sense, then we're like, well, you know, this isn't a problem now, but this is more of a preventative thing. This treatment that we're going to do is more of a preventative thing rather than curing anything. So let's change this now so that it doesn't become a problem in the future. And that's you know, a very simple way of describing what I was doing before bike fitting, which was working with those other athletes in exactly the same way and doing those biomechanical assessments to work out what their biomechanical weaknesses were in their sport and what their bodies go through in that particular sport versus, you know, what their bodies can go through now. I mean, as a example, I used to do a lot of work with rugby players. We had a big connection with the rugby club. The amount of rugby players that can't do a single leg plank because they can smash themselves into guys of 25 stone, but they can't do a single leg plank very well. And it's things like that that you pick up on and then try and say, right, well, you've not got any problems now, but actually, if you don't improve your core strength, there's a big chance that you're probably going to get injured in a match somewhere down the line pretty soon.
Yeah, and I think it's that getting people to understand their bodies and what they do, and once they have that understanding, then they can make those better decisions. So yeah, it's interesting, always interesting when athletes are really specific in their capabilities, like rugby players. I always thought that rugby players were always really kind of well-rounded athletes because they basically have to do a bit of everything. They have to be strong, they have to be fast, they have to have, but also super resilient. But maybe they're not because they do. There's a lot of injuries out there.
Yeah, and it's probably important to note that these weren't, you know, international level athletes. These were semi-professional athletes. So still, a lot of them still had jobs on the side as well as getting paid to play rugby. So maybe they weren't spending as much time as a professional, fully fledged professional athlete would do in the gym or on a specific program. But yeah, there's definitely several out there that, I mean, they have this big amount of strength, but not maybe as much conditioning as they should have.
And I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, just talking about cyclists. I've been talking about other athletes, but are there any tips you can give to the cyclists out there about, what they could be doing in terms of their functionality, their strength, their mobility, as to, assessing themselves, maybe where they might have a bit of weakness, or is there any easy little kind of tests that they can do?
Yeah, so easy test is probably so the important thing is like there's off the bike stuff and on the bike stuff. And I always think looking at this sort of thing is best done off the bike because the bike itself influences a lot of movement patterns when you put that human body onto it. So to actually assess you as a human definitely needs to be done off the bike. And I think a lot of people or a lot of cyclists who've ever done a Pilates class or a yoga class might find out a lot about themselves by just going through that class and that process, which then brings me on to like what I would suggest you do, which is ultimately a lot of movements, a lot of biomechanical movements that involve different aspects of physiology, like strength, flexibility, and see what happens, and just experiment with your body and try and get yourselves into certain positions and do certain movements and watch and see and look at what's happening to your body when you're doing them. So, the basic ones, the very basic ones that we'd start by getting people to do are squats, lunges, maybe a deadlift type movement as well. But single leg squats and lunges especially, you can learn a lot about your hip and knee and ankle stability by just doing those sort of movements and doing them in front of a mirror, so you can actually see yourself from the front on and know which direction does your knee track in, does your ankle pronate, does your arch collapse, does your hip flick out to the side, what's your stability like, what's your balance like. All of these different things are going to give you an idea as to where you might be struggling or lacking in terms of flexibility and strength. The difficult bit is knowing whether those things actually matter to you, because you can lack in certain areas and you can be very good in certain areas, but actually whether that makes a difference to you and your cycling is another question. And yeah, we can all, if we look for problems, we can all find them within ourselves. Even the most well-trained athletes who spend multiple hours a week working on their bodies in terms of strength and flexibility, if you look hard enough, you'll find weaknesses. But do those weaknesses make a difference and do they matter? Because if they don't, then don't go and spend 2-3 hours a week of your life working on them, because you're not going to get any major benefit from that. It's not value for time. You're not getting the kickback that you want out of doing some sort of exercise or flexibility work. So that's the more difficult bit, but you can actually pick up quite a lot of biomechanical stuff from doing movements and strength-based stuff in front of a mirror.
Yeah, I think just being a well-functioning human being, first and foremost, is always the kind of approach we like to take. Can you do all those kind of primal movements that you were just suggesting? And actually, that made me think of you were mentioning earlier about the difference between pain and chronic pain, and that window of time of, say, around about three months plus. If you've been experiencing a certain discomfort for a certain amount of time, then it literally changes the way your brain perceives how your body is moving and what that movement pattern means to your body. And so, yeah, the same can be applied to all the movement that you've ever done and everything that you've experienced. And so maybe preferencing of kind of weight to one side when you're doing a squat, for example, you probably have no idea that you're doing it because your body's made it completely automatic. And so then if you see something similar on the bike, then you could ask that $1 million question of like, well, does it matter? Does it matter that I'm listing over to the right side? And that seems to be part of the movement pattern that my body's established.
And the one that we see as fitters a lot is sitting off to one side of the saddle, and the brain thinking that is central. And as soon as you force that person to sit in the middle of their saddle, they think they're off to one side because the brain's perception of where the middle is totally wrong. And it's that sort of, it's that perception that happens, like you say, in all walks of life, and not just with pain, but any sort of movement pattern that we do day to day. And the important thing there to note is that if you change that movement pattern that you think you should change, it will feel abnormal to start with. And that's why we always suggest that after a bike fit, you need a certain amount of riding time for that abnormal sensation to go, or that different sensation to go. And then, and only then, can you actually truly judge the new position or the new fit or the new whatever you've just tested, the new saddle. Yeah, you need time. Body needs time.
Would you give a certain kind of time frame for those kind of new adaptations to take place, or again, is that really individual?
Yeah, it's sort of individual, just based on how much riding they're doing. But I mean, the very generic guidance is 4 to 6 weeks. It's normally how long it takes to really break down those neurological pathways and develop new ones, which is ultimately what we're trying to do. And that is something that I find myself saying a lot within a fit, is like trying to get people to understand, well, why does it take 6 weeks to adapt? It's like, well, yeah, these changes in the way that your muscles work and move is instant. It happens straight away as soon as we move the saddle height or something, or the cleat position. But it's actually those neural pathways that are the important thing to change before your brain perceives these changes as normal, and that's the slow bit. So yeah, no fixed number, but definitely some general guidelines out there for time frames.
Yeah. All right. So seems to be the theme of this talk: know yourself, know what your body's doing, and give yourself time to kind of adapt. And I guess if you're going down the wormhole of trying to fix yourself and so on, then maybe sometimes it's good to get a little extra perspective from someone else, or certainly an objective perspective, even if it's just filming yourself. The camera doesn't lie.
The camera doesn't lie, no, and this is why it's very hard to go just on feel as well, because everything you do normally will feel right, and anything that's different from that will feel wrong. Even if that different thing is better for you, it will feel wrong to start with. So, like you say, having a different perspective is important rather than just going off feel, because your brain can trick you into thinking that things are right when actually they just feel normal.
Those brains, eh?
Those pesky brains. Yeah.
All right, good stuff, Dan. I think that's probably a really good place to leave it. I think we've gone through a wide variety of different topics covering like body positions and body shapes and pain and how we deal with pain, and kind of how neurologically our brain deals with pain, and kind of your process of bike fitting, certainly from a clinical perspective. Yeah, if people want to find you, where can we find you? Either on the great web and physically as well.
Yeah, so we're on ukbikefit.com, the website, and then Instagram at ukbikefit, Facebook UK Bike Fit, and as of recently YouTube UK Bike Fit. So yeah, check us out there. And then physically we are in Matlock, Derbyshire, in the UK.
All right. Oh, you can be YouTube famous then.
Hopefully not. we have a media guy now, and his instructions was to do YouTube, so we're trusting him and going with it. So we'll see what happens.
Nice. All right. Well, good luck for the rest of the season. And yeah, thanks so much for talking with us. It's been a real pleasure. And thank you for sharing all your insights. And
likewise. And thank you for having me on.
Well, all right, cool. And hopefully maybe we'll get you on again with some more chat about pro positions and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'd love to.
All right. Till next time. All right. Thanks, Dan.
Take care.
If you made it to the end of this episode, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed what you heard, do leave us a rating or review, as this really helps other riders find our podcast too, and motivates us to keep making more episodes. Thanks for your support, and catch you on the next one.
Suffering from numb hands, tingling toes, and any other persistent discomforts when you ride? These are all signs that your bike fit could be improved. If you're bike fit curious, get in touch with Wei or Matt by emailing info@foundation.fit or finding them on Instagram @FDN_bikefit. Finally, for all your bike servicing needs, custom dream bike or hand-built wheels, go to www.frequencycycleworks.com or find me on Instagram @frequencycycleworks. Until next time, keep on spinning.